I'm going to focus on my story, which is how I built a service business internationally, but some of these lessons could be transferred to other types of businesses as well. So basically, I work at the cross-section or the interface between the creative world and the worlds of technology and consulting. So I'm a creative director and consultant, and I work with tech companies and help them to clarify complex ideas and then explain them to the rest of the world. So what we're going to cover is these topics down here. So firstly, how to build and nurture an international network. We're going to talk about mindset, a bit about pricing, logistics, competition, remote teams, and cultural differences. So a quick little bit about my story. So I'm originally from the UK, but I got my first taste of living and working abroad when I did Erasmus in Oslo. I then went to Japan and lived there for a couple of years, which was really fascinating. I was working as a teacher, but while I was there, I built a side gig as a photographer. I then moved to Malaysia and carried on teaching and building my photography business on the side. And a few years later, I moved to Spain. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about is the first step in this journey is to differentiate and dominate the local market through specialization. So what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is that whatever it is you do, whether it's photography or consulting or marketing or whatever it is, first of all, you need to get very good and very specialized in one thing. So you get known for doing a specific subset of things very, 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 very well. And if you can do that on a local level, then you can also do that on an international level. And that's exactly what I did. Now, as I said, I spent quite a bit of time living in Spain. So after Malaysia, I moved to Spain, and I moved there just as the global financial crisis was kicking in. So it wasn't an ideal time to move, especially as Spain was very, very badly affected by the global financial crisis. I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger for you all. Maybe a bit more. Yeah, there we go. Right, so 2008, 2007, 8, 9, the crisis hit, and this was a very, very challenging time for me. There was a recession, and I very quickly realized that although I was trying to make my first steps as an international photographer, I'd failed to properly consolidate what I'd done back in Malaysia, back in KL. So I had a bit of a network in KL, but I hadn't squeezed enough value from it to be able to continue surviving. If I'd stayed there a little bit longer and consolidated my client base, then it would have been easier for me to then jump to a new market. But what happened was I jumped to a new market, the recession hit, and basically I didn't have enough work to keep me going. I also made some incorrect assumptions. I basically assumed that one market would be the same as another. There was a skills gap, by which I mean I basically wasn't as good as I thought I was. I didn't know enough people. I carried on living the same way that I'd been living back in Malaysia, and all things kind of came to a head, and I basically ran out of money. But there was one thing that I did right, which I'm very grateful for now, and that is the fact that I was international from day one. What do I mean by that? I decided that I was going to build and run my business with an international mindset and international client base. So how did I do it? Well, the first thing that I did was I maintained old pastures and sowed seeds in new ones. So once I realized what was going on economically, I went back to KL and I did a few more big shoots there because the The Far East, as you probably know, wasn't affected in the same way as Europe was by the global financial crisis. So I thought, well, I realized I messed up a little bit there, but it's not too late. I can always go back and rekindle some of those business connections that I had in Malaysia. But at the same time, I was also making a very big effort to do as much as I could in new European markets. Step 2 was to eat humble pie. Although I had international ambitions, I wasn't quite good enough to do all the things that I wanted to do. So it was very important for me to learn new things. I've been living and working in Asia for a long time, and quite frankly, the standards that I had to perform to as a photographer in Europe were different, and there were a lot of things that I had to that I had to learn. I'm not saying better, but just different. So I ate lots of humble pie and learned a lot. Specialization, again, was super important. So I made a point of paying attention to the occasions when I got very, very good feedback from clients. And this allowed me to continually refine my approach and specialize. So back then, I developed a specialization in photographing people. But in the recession, there wasn't a great deal of demand for portrait photography. And so I started to look for new opportunities in new markets. And I began to do work for tech companies, because I realized that tech companies had a need for people who had very good storytelling skills. So, as I say, I got into a cycle of specialization and continuous refinement, rather like a startup. I guess some of you will be familiar with lean startup methodology. That was basically the idea that I was applying to my business, although I wouldn't have called it back then. Point number 4, give before you take. What I mean by this is that basically what goes around comes around. And although I was in a bit of a desperate situation economically, I always tried to figure out how I could help other people out before I actually asked for any favors. Gary Vaynerchuk puts this quite nicely with his jab, 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 right hook philosophy. What he means by that is you should always give much more than you're actually asking from the market. So I tried to do that as best I could. An example of that is something called Twestival. Twestival was a charity fundraising global simultaneous party that was organized via Twitter festival, Twestival. So I got involved with it, organizing that. That was how I actually got an inroad into the world of technology and realized that there was a possibility for me to apply my skills there. Number 5, tell your international story. So even though I was working on a shoestring and dealing with some pretty serious economic challenges, every time I did an international job, I made sure that as many people as possible knew about it through my blog, through my Facebook, through my Twitter. Instagram didn't exist back then, but if I'd had Instagram, then I would have used it. Because at the end of the day, what makes you international is being international. And so every time I got on a train, got on a plane, got on a bus, went some interesting places, I wove that into the story of that I was telling to my existing and potential customers. Again, focus on one sector or niche, super important, because if you try to be all things to all people, then you dilute your own offering. You want people to think of you when they have a very specific type of problem, which I've summarized here. When people think of X, wherever they are, they think of you. So in other words, what I'm trying to say here is that when you are highly specialized, your location becomes irrelevant or almost irrelevant. Another good example, Slush. Slush is a big tech conference that takes place in Finland every year. For a few years, I was going up there every year. By that point, I'd branched out into video and other kinds of media services, and I was very, very focused on the world of technology. So I'd go up there, I'd talk to startups, and I explained what I did. And because there were very few other people who were doing that exact same thing, the fact that they were based in Helsinki or Stockholm or anywhere else in the Nordics, and I was based in Barcelona, was irrelevant. There's a quick picture from Slush. So let's talk a little bit about how to build an international network. Well, the first important point is that once you become specialized, your world is a small world. The world as a whole, geographically, is very big, but the world in which you operate is actually quite small. So your job is to try to build a network within that small world, within that small specialized world. And it's not about you. A lot of the time when people try to build a network, they go out there like hunters, hunting for opportunities. Actually, networking is fundamentally about giving and about figuring out how you can give value to other people, how you can connect people to other people that you know. So it's a very long game. Ultimately, you will derive some sort of benefit from it, but that can't be the thing that you are thinking of when you're actually going out there, going to conferences and meetups and so on and so forth. So the question at the forefront of your mind should be, who do you know and how can you help the people that you're meeting? Again, demonstrate your focused expertise. So if people do ask you what you do, you should be able to tell a story that is very laser focused around delivering a highly focused and highly specialized skill set. If you're trying to break into a new country and you're not quite sure where to start, don't wait for the opportunity to come to you. Do some personal projects that take you there. So let's say that you want to break into the market in South Korea. That could be very difficult for you to get started, especially if you don't really know anyone in South Korea. So do a personal project, whether it's a coding project or a marketing project or a typography project. I have a bit of a thing for Korean typography that is inherently Korean, so that you can get that first little foot in the door and play a long game. What I mean by that is that you can't expect any results overnight. Rinse and repeat a lot. Keep doing the same things over and over again, and eventually the seeds that you're planting will pay dividends. There's a lot of text on this slide, but I can promise to you that if you are suitably focused, differentiated, competent, appropriately priced, then and frictionless, then your location is almost a non-issue. Let me explain quickly what I mean by frictionless. What I mean is that you shouldn't be a pain in the neck to hire. Sometimes I've wanted to hire people who are in other geographical locations and they make it difficult for me. Don't be difficult to hire, because in many people's minds, the geographical distance could be a bit of a friction point. So don't do anything that makes it more complicated than it has to be. To give you a very specific example here, some years ago, I was hired by a company in San Francisco, which was something like 9 hours behind. And they were a little bit unsure about hiring me because of this. So what did I do? I started getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning so that I could jump on conference calls with them. So I removed the friction, and consequently, we're able to get the project done. They were really happy. And then after that, they were able to hire us, or keen to hire us over and over again, because that friction point was no longer a friction point. So your location becomes almost a non-issue. The general point about being frictionless is that you have to make yourself an option. And that is a function of the way you position your services, which, as I say, should be highly specialized and differentiated. You've got to be priced appropriately. You need to be charging your customers in the right currency. So if I'm based in London, I'm normally charging in pounds, and I've got a client in, say, South Korea. Ideally, I want to be billing them in Korean won, not in pounds. Again, because that way it feels more local to them. Of course, you have to do some calculations in terms of making sure that the currency exchange is not going to be a major issue, but it's important to do this. I've already talked about time zone and logistics as well. When you first start to deliver a service internationally, you're going to have to rejig the way you work to account for things like time zone and account for the fact that you might be working with remote teams and so on and so forth. Ideally, when you get this mix right, it should feel to the client like you're just down the road. That's what you're aiming for. So let's say that an opportunity comes along and the client asks you, where are you? Your answer should be, right now, I'm in Berlin. Right now, I'm in Stockholm. And then the next thing you say is, why are you asking? Why do I say this? So this is important because if the client is based in London and you happen to be in Bangkok, if you say, I'm in Bangkok, that can end the conversation for some clients because they think, oh, they're just in Bangkok. By adding the word right now, you imply that you're moving around and that you might be somewhere else next time. You then need to move the conversation on and ask them why they're asking. And presumably there's a possibility that they might hire you. So you need to make the location irrelevant. And again, remove the friction point. This point is particularly salient given our current situation. Get on a plane only if you have to. With or without coronavirus, this is important. Of course, some people love flying, traveling around. It's glamorous, it's exciting, and all of that. But it's also time-consuming, expensive, and not very sustainable. And you can only fly to one place at once. So when you are building an international business, you want to be traveling as little as possible, ideally. That might sound slightly paradoxical, but it's important. Okay, that connects to the next point, which is use local talent and resources as much as you can. So many reasons for this. Local talent has knowledge that you won't have if it's a market that you're not particularly knowledgeable about, and it'll also keep your overheads quite low. I'm going to skip over this bit about remote teams because I think probably a lot of you know quite a bit about that. I just want to say a little bit about mindset because that's maybe more interesting. So this is super important. Whenever you're entering a new geography, only do so if you have a genuine interest in that geography, because if you don't, firstly, it's going to show through your lack of knowledge. And secondly, you'll never be able to maintain it for long enough to actually do enough business there for it to be worthwhile. So what does that mean? That means learning as much as you can about the local culture, especially the business culture. If necessary, learning a little bit about the language, learning about the customs, about the holidays, marking their national holidays in your calendar. You call them when it's a national holiday, that could be potentially awkward or embarrassing. So actually go there if you can. Go to events, go and live there for a while if that's an option for you. And again, give before you take. See what you can do for them before you ask anything. Okay, marketing and pricing. Again, this is business 101, really, but your value in your own home country may be different to the value in your target market. So, for example, in Scandinavia,
Hi Tom, I can hear you right now.
hear me?
You...
Oh,
no, it's working.
now it's working. All right, okay. Yes, so don't assume that that what you're charging in your home market is the same as in the other market. It might be that you can command a higher price for your services. So do a little bit of research. The international factor can also be very good for boosting your brand. And yeah, ideally, you want to try to sort of cultivate the impression that you're kind of everywhere and nowhere in particular. Because if you cultivate the impression that you're everywhere, then you are, by definition, international. But when customers actually approach you to hire you, then you don't want them to think that you are locked down to a specific place, or that you could be there if they actually need you to be. Okay. All right, we've got 2 minutes left. So I guess we've got time for a question, or maybe two. Let's have a look. So Elizabeth, you raised your hand. Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, I was just going to say that your screens are not moving on our screen. It's a little late, but maybe for your next presentation, for some reason, we're still looking at the cathedral. Yeah.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah.
That's
I don't know why.
Really weird. Yeah, because it says on my side that that I am actually screen sharing. Well, has that been the... Yeah, if that's been the case for everybody, if you ping me your email address, then I can send you the slides. That helps. Yeah. Were you able to follow follow the flow of my...
Oh, yeah, it was an excellent conversation. I was able to follow everything perfectly.
Okay.
It's just that we do see your screen.
Yeah.
But the screen is stuck on the cathedral picture for some reason.
I guess that's just, yeah, that's really odd, because on my side it has been moving and I haven't had any...
How strange.
That is really odd. Oh yes, I see. Yeah, your comments now. Whoops. All right. Well,
no worries.
Yeah. There's my email address. So if... hang on, the wrong thing here. Right, I'm just trying to get back in the chat. Everyone, right. So my email address is there. So if you ping me, then with just a reference to what it's about, then I'll send you the slides. If you have any other questions about this topic, feel free to drop me a line. I blasted my way through that, and I'm sorry you couldn't see my slides. But if you have any questions about anything at all, I'd be very happy to answer them. So thank you for listening, and enjoy the rest of the event.